So I decided to do my project on how Christians should respond to abuse in the foster care system, which this does branch off yesterday's topic a little bit, but I decided to more focus on abuse inside of the system instead of like abuse or of the like biological parents. So so I divided this into a few sections. So I have what is foster care? What does abuse in the foster care system look like? What are Christians doing right and what are we doing wrong? And some solutions we can have. So, what is foster care? So, 1 in 20 American children are placed in the foster care system at some point in their lives. This is about 5%, which seems like a small amount of people, but when you think about how many people live in America, this is actually like a lot of people who are affected by this. So, how does foster care work? So, when children can't live with their biological parents, they're temporarily taken from their parents and live with a foster caretaker. And the ultimate goal is reunification with their biological parents or finding a permanent home through adoption. And they can be taken away from their parents because of a lot of reasons, like neglect, abuse, one of their parents died, or substance abuse. CPS conducts investigations, and if it proves that the child's unsafe or could come to harm, they'll be placed in foster care. And they receive about 3.5 investigations a year. And they don't investigate all of these, but they investigate most of them. And there are three different types there's kinship care, typical foster homes, and specialized foster homes. Kinship care is when a kid is placed with a relative that's not like in their biological parents' home. Um, so like a grandparent or an aunt or uncle. And a typical foster home is when they're living with a foster family, so like what we typically think of, or in a group home. Um, and then specialized foster homes are where children with special needs are placed. And this isn't where all special needs children go, just because there's not that many available. But like a lot of kids with like autism or like other disorders are placed here, or if they have like chronic illnesses. Um, and all age kids are in the foster system, but most kids are 9 to 11 years old, and those are the kids that spend most of their time in foster care. And a lot of kids age out once they turn 18 because they can't be helped anymore once they're adults. Um, and being placed in foster care, even if it's just for a little bit, increases their chances of homelessness, arrest, substance abuse, teen pregnancy, and more. Especially if they age out, just because after that they have no support. So it's just like all of a sudden they're like on their own. So, what does abuse in foster care look like? So, almost half of foster children experience abuse while they're in the system. Many cases of abuse, especially with foster children, go unreported. So, this is like an estimate. So, this is one case of abuse that's pretty recent. And this is Dakota Levi Stevens, and he was killed by his foster mom about a year ago. And his foster mom was just charged like a few weeks ago. Um, and it was either 6 months or 6 years. I think that might have been a typo. But either way, that's way too short because he was killed by his foster mom. So what happened was he had been hit by her many times, and he was hit in the face, so he ran away to his neighbor's house, so he could get help. And she like tracked him down and basically like killed him with her body weight there, which is very sad. And she was sentenced to like basically no time, even though she killed him. So that's just one example of when that led to death. Um, so abuse is rarely reported due to a lot of issues, such as systemic issues, the fear of not being believed, and the fact that many perpetrators are in positions of power over their victims. However, American authorities have confirmed nearly 560,000 children were victims of abuse and neglect just in 1 year. And this does include all children, not just kids in foster care. But this puts into perspective just how common child abuse is and how overlooked it is. Foster children are 7 to 8 times more likely to be examined for abuse by pediatricians and other doctors. And in many states, sexual abuse is the most common type of abuse. In Indiana, it's 68% of foster child abuse is sexual, and this can occur in any situation. But when you add the risks to the vulnerabilities foster children have, the likelihood just becomes way higher. And foster children are overall very vulnerable to manipulation, and they don't have many constant adult figures that they can go to for help because they're constantly being moved around. So, like, they don't have a parent they can go to or one person just because they're always in and out of different homes. So, they can't really know who to trust. And with the overcrowding in foster care, there's just so many children, and abuse is often unnoticed, not necessarily on purpose. It's just because they can't tell. And abusers are often relatives from kinship care, foster parents, other children that are in the system, and even people like social workers, therapists, and teachers. Relatives who care for children often have issues like substance abuse or like a history of crime, but since they're related to the kid, it's just preferred that they stay with them to like keep the family together, which is good, but when that person is dangerous, it can often lead to more abuse. And sometimes, if the kid is in kinship care, the biological parents will find access to their child and abuse them even more because the relatives don't take the circumstances very seriously. So, what are Christians doing right? So, many Christians are already doing a great job with foster care and adoption. And as Mr. Satterfield mentioned in class, without Christians, there would be almost nowhere for orphans and foster children to go. 65% of foster parents are active members of Christian churches, and many Christians foster and adopt children around America. And we also support foster care in some ways. I have on the board. Um, and one way that we're locally helping out is Miracle Hill. You'll probably recognize this name because they're very involved in our area, like with thrift stores, helping the homeless, and they also have group homes and help out in foster care. They help connect Christian foster families with children and also have like group homes and orphanages. If any of y'all remember, in like fifth grade, we took a field trip to the group homes to like help out, and I still remember that they were doing such a great job of like supporting the kids and making sure they felt loved, even though like their biological parents weren't with them. Um, and there's also other ways that Christians are supporting foster care through like their churches and other volunteer organizations and after school programs. And a lot of families are doing a great job of giving these children a safe place to stay by being foster parents and showing them like God's love. But there are also a lot of things that we're doing wrong. So about 65% of foster parents are active Christians who go to church at least once a week. So these aren't people who just like say they're Christians. These are people who are like very active. Um, And if around half of foster children experience abuse, there's definitely like a good bit of overlap here, which means that some Christians are abusing their foster children. Um, so we should be aware that even in Christian spaces like churches, schools, and stuff like that, there's still abuse that could be happening. So we need to be aware of that and looking out for everyone. Um, and foster care is often also perceived badly due to how often abuse happens. So that means a lot of children that are in dangerous situations with their biological parents are just so scared to go into the foster system that they would rather stay in a bad situation with their parents. Um, so this will put children in harm's way even more just because they're so scared, because it's just seen as somewhere where so much sexual abuse happens. Um, and we're playing an active role in being involved in foster care, but I feel like the matter of abuse goes very ignored. Um, and it's simple for a lot of Christians to sweep the abuse under the rug because we're already playing a part in fostering children and helping that. But we also need to be alert for abuse that is happening within the system also. So I also have some Bible verses that show how important orphans and people who like don't have parents with them are to God. So I have Psalm 146:9, which says, "The Lord watches over the sojourners; He upholds the widow and the fatherless, but the way of the wicked he brings to ruin. So this shows that God really does care about people who don't have their parents available to take care of them, and abusers he will punish eventually. And Ephesians 6:4 says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." And this teaches us that if we're parents or foster parents, our job is to not like be mean to these children, but to show God's love to them and really care for them and not and Matthew 19:14 says, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." And this shows that one of Jesus's like priority was to care for the children. So our actions should reflect that, and we should like really care about foster children, especially those who are experiencing more abuse. So I have a few solutions that we can take to like stop this abuse from happening. And one of these solutions is to recruit and retain foster parents that are very loving and can keep their children safe. Because the amount of children in foster care is increasing, so it's important to increase the amount of foster parents available. But this does not mean it should be easy to be a foster parent. So many people abuse their foster children even after passing background checks and being certified. So we need to make sure that this like doesn't happen to more kids just because we want foster parents available. Um, and half of foster parents quit in their first year. According to my research, the biggest issue for foster parents quitting is the lack of support they feel from like those around them. And there's always more we can do to support foster parents because a lot of churches do really good with establishing foster parents and like getting them recommendations and connecting them with kids. But we need to make sure we're also supporting them through the whole process and making sure that they like feel actually supported so they don't like give up because it's very hard, especially when like tons of kids are coming through their home and they don't know you and you don't know them, so it's just like a weird situation. So both like people need to feel supported. Um, and making sure children are loved and supported is one of the biggest ways we can make an impact because everyone can do this, not just like foster parents, social workers, people like that. Um, Obviously, because like most of us in this room can't just like be foster parents, and not everyone should be a foster parent just because that's not like what God's plan is. But everyone can make sure that children feel loved and safe because if they have someone they can feel like looks out for them, they're going to like feel that you're a trustworthy person to like if you're being abused, you can tell them. And they're just so vulnerable to the abuse if they're like if they have those like loving mentors or just anyone looking out for them, that just reduces the chance of abuse happening. Um, Funding is also a huge issue with foster care because the system is funded by the federal government, state and local governments, and private organizations, which that seems like a lot, but with the amount of kids in foster care, which is about 400,000 almost, it's just like there's not enough money to go around because each family has to like have money to like take care of the kids. There has to be enough to pay the social workers, like, and there's just not enough money to go around, especially because foster care just isn't a big priority, especially with the federal and state governments. And there's not like too much we can do about this just because like government funding we can't really control. But like donations always help and stuff like that. And one last way to stop abuse is to keep children out of foster care entirely. And obviously, if the situation requires a child to be taken away from the parent, then that obviously should happen and they should be taken to foster care. But one of the main reasons that kids get taken away from their parents is because of opioid addiction or because their parents overdose. So if we support foster care by supporting biological parents with like systems that would help them like get out of substance abuse or other problems like poverty and stuff like that, then we can just stop the cycle of abuse from happening at all by like keeping children out of foster care, which should be our ultimate goal to like keep families together. Do y'all have any questions?
Um, oh, cool. I can go first. Sorry, I'm gonna go first. I might have missed it. What percentage? Maybe this is something we haven't found out. What percentage of foster kids are abused?
I had a statistic from one of my sources, and it was almost half. It was like 46%, and that's like a combination they had of like an estimate and data, just because like a lot of them go unreported because
Right.
they're kids. But that's like the statistic I had for that. But it varies on the state.
Right, and that's answering my next question. It's gotta be tough to figure out
Yeah.
because it seems like the adult in the situation problem, but also probably the main source of it.
Yeah, so they
Right.
can't go to the parent if the parent's the one abusing them. So there's just like not much.
I've always like it's one of those projects that I'm always interested when it comes up because some of the best people that I've ever met are foster parents. Just really people. You got to have a really big heart to want to get yourself involved in something like it. Just takes so much effort. And you're right, like there is this. You use the word perception, like there's this reputation that foster care has that this is a broken system and a lot of problems happen. I'm glad to see that we're talking about it. As far as kinship care, like I really like the point about kinship care that there seems to be like it seems like there would be an important um, you'd want to prioritize keeping them with some kind of family,
Yeah.
right? But also like that was really interesting that it also means that the biological parents that maybe we're trying to get kids away from access to.
Yeah, because technically they're not allowed, but a lot of the times, like it's just easy for them to go see the kid, even
Right.
if they don't technically like have their rights.
Right.
Like especially if it's like a grandparent or like an aunt or uncle, they can easily just go see them, and then more abuse can happen.
So again, maybe I missed it. What was the what how frequently does that happen? Like how often is
I
first?
I had a statistic somewhere, like in my research paper, I think, but I don't have that on my slideshow.
No worries.
But that's like the biggest. Kinship care is when most of the abuse happens, not in typical foster homes.
Got it. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Hey, classmates, you have anything?
Well, honestly, I feel like foster care is such a broad like term, and it was very confusing just because I didn't really understand much about it, and like how the system worked, and then I just knew there was so much abuse in the system that I wanted to like look
Anybody else?
into. Yeah, I definitely think so because I think it's important for them to stay with some sort of family if that's possible, just because of like they've already had to be taken away from their parent. But I feel like it should definitely be a lot stricter because they look into the relatives a little bit, but it usually like it doesn't go far enough. So that's why like most of the abuse happens there. So I definitely think they should limit it a little bit more. I can't really tell like what that's gonna look like for me just because that's very far down the road. But I definitely want to be involved in some way.
That's kind of like importance of projects like this. Like even if it's not feasible for a family to be directly involved, but it's one of the benefits, social benefits of being church members. Is like, hey, if your church is involved in this, you can.
Yeah, there's like tons of stuff. And just like making sure that children feel like loved, even if it's just in small ways, makes like abuse happen way less. Or like if they're already in an abusive situation, it makes them feel like they can trust someone to
Yep. Thank you.
tell. Thank you.